Yeah. So you guys are actually pretty professionals. There are two traditions of anarchy. Are we on now? We're rolling, baby. Okay. Yeah, well, there's two traditions of anarchy. The European tradition with people like Bakunin and Kropotkin and Malatesta and Emma Goldman. And they style themselves socialist anarchists. And that's like an oxymoron, because in order to have socialism, you have to have central planning and government control. Then you have the American edition of anarchy, which are people like Lysander Spooner, which is about both free minds and free markets. The European socialist anarchists, like I said, it's a contradiction in terms, don't believe in free markets. So if you don't have free markets, that means you don't have any property. If you don't have any property, what are you going to do? Ask somebody else if you can use something, if you need to do it. It's crazy. I've read most of what Bakunin's written, and he's a very good writer about social things, about how oppressive government is, how stupid government is, how useless it is. He's an excellent rhetorician, but he knows nothing about economics. Well, he used to hang out with Karl Marx, no wonder. When I was a little kid, my mother, I lived in Chicago, we lived in Chicago, and we went through a drive through the ghetto one day. And I was about, 4 or 5 years old. I was just a little kid. And I saw these slums that the black people lived in, and I said to my mom, I said, wow, can't they do something about helping these people? And I actually wrote a letter to President Eisenhower, if you can believe anything that's stupid.
Kind of cute.
It is kind of cute to have done that. All right, so I guess, like most brainless little kids, I was a liberal. And then I guess I became a conservative after I read Barry Goldwater's book when he ran in 1964. And I said, this makes more sense from many points of view. And then later on, I became a libertarian, which is somebody that believes that politics is nonsense and the most important thing is not to aggress against other people or their property. Then, my next evolution was, I read a book called The Market for Liberty by Morris and Linda Tannehill. And that was a defense, or not a defense, it was an explanation, very reasonable, logical, well-written, of how the world would work without government. And I realized that the idea of government was a stupidity and a fraud. So at this point, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. As far as democracy is concerned, when we talk about political democracy, good riddance, and the sooner the better, because I'm an anarchist. That means that I don't believe in the state as an institution. I don't believe in the government as an institution. I think that the market can provide absolutely everything that people want and need, including justice and including protection, which is what the state, if you're going to have a state, are the only things that it should provide. I mean, since the state, I'll give you the argument for anarchism. It's that the problem with politics is it's based on coercion, force. Like Chairman Mao said, it comes out of the barrel of a gun. So a moral or reasonable person wants to limit force as much as possible in dealing with other people. So you want to limit the state, which is pure congealed force. So how do you limit the state? Well, if the state is force, maybe it should only be there to protect you from force, okay, if you're going to have a state. That means maybe you can have an army to protect you from force, coercion, from outside of its bailiwick, and a police to protect you from force inside its bailiwick, and a justice system, a court system, to allow you to adjudicate disputes without resorting to force. And if the state did nothing but those things, I could live with it. That's not a problem, but it never, ever ends there. And in today's world, if you look at the US government, it does absolutely everything Uh, it provides food, shelter, clothing, free cell phones, millions of laws, but it doesn't protect you from force. I mean, the streets are dangerous, the court system, you can't get into it, and if you get into it, you'll be bankrupted if you ever get out of it. So the state today is completely dysfunctional, and it serves no useful purpose, in point of fact. It's a myth. I don't think democracy is a good thing. It's become like a surrogate god for people, where it's like apple pie, mother, and democracy. Okay, I like apple pie. I think mothers are good things. But who says that democracy is a good thing? It's basically just mob rule with the sports coat. It's the majority tells the minority what to do. I don't think anybody ought to tell anybody else what to do. So you don't need, look, the problem with people that are promoting democracy is they believe in politics as a way that people should relate. But politics is all about coercion and force. So democracy is a false god. And it's a real problem when people confuse freedom with democracy. They've really got nothing to do with each other. It basically boils down to, in today's world, it's two wolves and a sheep deciding what to have for dinner. That's what democracy is all about. And of course, the founders of the US tried to moderate this problem by having a constitution. And the Constitution is there solely and entirely to limit the government and keep the government from oppressing the people that supposedly control the government. But they don't. It's the people that are in the government that are, look, the government is an entity unto itself. It's like General Motors puts General Motors' interests first. Okay, that's fine, that's logical. The government puts its interests first too. And they're not the same as those of the country or the citizens of the country. At this point, there are so many laws that nobody can even read them. The new ones that are written every year, no one human being can even read all the laws that are written in the United States every year. So how many laws should you have? Well, some people say, well, we got 10 commandments, we can live with them. I'd say no. Most people, including myself, can't remember all the 10 commandments, and some of them are entirely irrelevant anyway. I think, in fact, that you only need 2 laws. You know what they say is, ignorance of the law is no excuse. But if you can't remember any of the laws, how can that be a true statement? It's ridiculous. So I think that there should be only 2 laws. Do all that you say you're going to do, and don't aggress against other people or their property. That's simple. And if you abide by those 2 laws, you'll be just fine. That's what common law is all about. And in that context, a lawyer can be an educated, reasonable person that decides whether you might have violated one of those 2 simple laws that I just enumerated. But maybe 2 laws is even too many. Some people can't even remember those 2 laws. If you want to have a sane society, it should be a society where everybody takes personal responsibility. Okay, that's simple. You control your own life. So the whole of the law really should be, do as thou wilt, because people do anyway. But be prepared to accept the consequences. And if that was the whole of the law, people might think a little bit before they did something that violated the person or property. The US, as we speak now at the beginning of 2020, is in pretty much the same situation as, well, let's say the US was in 1859 or 1860. It's on the cusp of massive civil disturbances. These people in red counties and blue counties hate each other. They think the other side is evil. They can't understand. They can't even talk to the other side. So chances are reasonably good that we'll have something resembling a civil war. But maybe not, because half the country is on psychiatric drugs. They're incapable of that. Half the country's so fat that they couldn't get out and fight. And the other half of the country is sitting in their mother's basements playing video games. So that's obviously 150% of the country is unqualified to fight a civil war, but we're likely to have one anyway. Actually, the U.S. should break up into at least two, probably more like 4 or 5 different countries to start with. I mean, the colors of the map on the wall have been running for millennia all over the world. So, of course, the United States isn't going to last. It used to be the U.S. Had generally common ideals. People were generally of a common race, more or less common religious beliefs, more or less common ethical beliefs. So they had something together. They had a culture. But the culture in the U.S. is rapidly being destroyed in all of those ways. So of course it's going to fall apart. I say things like I'm saying right now all the time. And I don't do it with the intention or the hope of changing anybody's mind. I just say it because I think it's good karma to say things that I think are the truth and things that might be helpful, but I don't expect them to change anything. I think there's a correlation between IQ and personal responsibility and so forth, but there are a lot of people that have high IQs that are socialists or communists. So it's really more of a moral, ethical thing than an intellectual thing. And if you want to make a sale to somebody about changing their politics, and I don't try to do that. I really don't care what other people think. If I say anything about it, it's just to amuse myself and to amuse them. The argument you've got to make should not be so much intellectual. It should be ethical, because people generally want to do the right thing. So you've got to show them that doing this is right and doing this is wrong. And maybe you're confused on that. Making an intellectual argument about, yeah, we'll get more production if we have capitalism than socialism, that doesn't resonate with most people. Ever since the founding of the US, there have always been commercial interests, businessmen, that go to the government and ask them to pass laws to tilt things in their favor. They say it's leveling the playing field. Really, it's tilting the playing field in their favor against their competitors. Everybody should try to play to their strong suit. And it's not up to the government or anybody else to try to artificially level the playing field. It's up to everybody as an individual to look for the playing field where they have an edge that speaks to their own personal advantages and abilities. I mean, that's the way to view it, not to get some, senseless criminals that go to work for the government to try to level the playing field for everybody. Most of the people that are rabidly supporting any politician, I don't care if it's Trump or Bernie or Pocahontas, I don't even know who all these people are, quite frankly. Being rabidly involved in politics is itself a psychological aberration. Why? Because if you're involved in politics, it says you're willing to use coercion and force to get other people to do things, making them follow the laws that you want to have passed. So it brings out the most criminal aspects of everybody to get involved in politics. If this thing turns out to be a huge commercial success, we can come back and do it again. And who knows, maybe you'll become a big movie guy and you can do a movie out of one of my books, or all of them, I don't care.